In 1967, the Motor City was burning. The biggest riot in American history erupted on the streets of Detroit. But the riot wasn't the only revolution going on. The 60s would see Detroit create wave after wave of music that would capture the sound of a nation in upheaval. In the early 60s, an aspirational record label would transcend Detroit's inner city to take black music to a national audience.
Once Motown became a major player in the music industry, well, that also kind of put Detroit more on the map.
People in the town were just so proud. If they go to California or New York, they say, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Motown." They wouldn't say Detroit, they'd say Motown.
And in the late 60s, a bunch of suburban kids would descend into the inner city to create revolutionary rock that expressed the rage of young white America.
We wanted to rewrite society. We wanted to build it from the ground up, you know, to tear everything down and start over.
I mean, on the one hand, we were serious political revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow the government. On the other hand, we were on acid.
You got the jams, motherfucker. They were like the ones we all got branded by.
Detroit in the 60s was a city on fire.
In the recording industry, there is a hot town. And when one good thing happens, then whoosh, they will swoop in from the coasts. In the 60s, Detroit had its moment.
So messed up. I want you here.
Detroit, Michigan, a Midwestern blue-collar city. Known as the Motor City since the 20s, Detroit is the hard-working home of the American car industry.
Well, my mother allowed me.
In the economically prosperous 50s, 4 out of every 5 cars in the world were made in the USA. Detroit became the city where they built the American dream.
This was the manufacturing center of America and thus the world. And that if you wanted it built, we built it in Detroit.
I was walking down Hazen Street.
Detroit as a city was a great city. It was a booming city. You had a lot of people who migrated.
I decided I'd drop in there that night. When I got there,
there were lots of factories there that had attracted many of the black families from the South.
they was really having a ball.
Fueled by migrant job seekers, the city's population swelled to a record 2 million, one of whom would become Detroit's first musical star.
From Mississippi, it's that famous boom boom boy, John Lee Hooker.
Chicago was the traditional home from home for Southern bluesmen, but John Lee Hooker bypassed the Windy City in favor of its less glamorous neighbor.
Boom, 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 boom. I'm gonna shoot you right down, right off of your feet. Take you home with me, put you in my house. Boom, 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 boom.
Hooker came to Detroit in 1948 looking for a job and found one at the Ford Motor Company.
When you're talking to me, that baby talk.
He passed through Detroit like so many working folk working their way up Highway 61, the famous highway Dillon memorialized, which was basically the artery from the south up to the industrial Midwest. And I think Hooker represents this kind of migratory spirit. The southern dispossessed looking for a new life.
Johnny Lee did for the blues what nobody else was doing at the time. He brought it out, and with his style of music, and it wasn't not traditional blues that he was playing. It was different and made everybody listen. It just turned the blues scene around in the city of Detroit.
Blues is such a three-chord thing. He's only had one. It was like the drone. It was all rhythm, you know, start the thump going.
John Lee Hooker's primitive style would become a benchmark for generations of Detroit rock and rollers. But the next factory worker to put his stamp on music would transform American pop. Berry Gordy Jr. had worked briefly for the same car manufacturer as John Lee Hooker, and he took inspiration from his time on the line to set up a record label with its sights on young America.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I need
the idea for an assembly line, starting with a frame and ending up a brand new shining car, you know, was just fascinating to me. So when I started my operation, that's what I wanted, a kid to come in off the street, one door, an unknown person, and then out another door, a star.
Working out of his inner city home, Gordy named Motown after Detroit. Like a production line, Motown sought to create pop records that had a uniform sound.
But there's something about the first 3 or 4 records that came out of Motown. You didn't tie them together right away, but after a while, Please Mr. Postman, My Guy, and Shop Around, and you realize, oh, there's something about these records you can tell, oh, these records are from the same place.
Gordy built Motown by exercising complete artistic control. The acts had no say, as the Supremes, a girl group from Detroit's Brewster Project, would find out.
When Our Love Go was brought to us, we said, well, that doesn't seem like it's the kind of record that's going to be a hit, and we need a hit.
Give a little better feeling on that, those guitar figures. And also the piano could add a little.
We got them to do it, although they were just shattered about it. They hated it.
This didn't sound like a hit, you know, it was just hand clap. Baby, baby, it was like so simple.
Diane's attitude, pissed off attitude about, she was definitely letting you know she didn't like this song. But it was just what the song needed. That was the first Where Our Love Go of 13 #1 songs that we alone had wrote that. Consecutive, one after the other, bam, bam, bam.
In-house songwriters Holland Dozier Holland were the engine that drove Motown. They could even turn company secretary Martha Reeves into a pop star at Ford, where Berry Gordy had worked.
He took us to the Ford Motor Company, and no one knew we were coming, especially the workers, because they kept saying, get those women out of here, we're trying to work. But the cars were being made, and I don't think anyone else will ever have that privilege. But these guys were actually welding the fenders on and putting the screws in the different places, and we were getting on and off of this car, and we watched it go from start to finish, singing Nowhere to Run. We got spray painted. We almost got tripped with cords and wires and things. It was a Mustang, and it was a wonderful experience. I think that for Detroiters, Motown was like the car industry. You know, it became a brand that people loved. And once Motown became a major player in the music industry, well, that also kind of put Detroit more on the map.
People in the town were just so proud, you know. about having this place here in town. And, oh yeah, I'm from Motown. You know, if they go to California, New York, they say, "Where are you from?" You know, in a conversation, say, "I'm from Motown." They wouldn't say Detroit. They'd say Motown.
By 1965, Motown had become, as its motto boasted, the sound of young America. Detroit dominated the mainstream US charts. But Gordy's manufactured pop was not the sound of young black Detroit. The campaign for civil rights had started in earnest in America, and Detroit had seen the largest march in history in 1963, when Martin Luther King led the Great March to Freedom. Black people were beginning to demand more, but conditions in Detroit's inner city hardly met their expectations. Overcrowding, unemployment, and an aggressive all-white police force had combined to create a ghetto that left some of its inhabitants seething.
Do you hate white people? Do I hate them? Yeah, I hate them. Do you hate white people?
Try to kill one of them.
You did try?
I say I would.
You would try and kill one?
That's right.
Would you fight white people? Would you try and kill white people?
Mm-hmm. All day long.
I mean, all of us was caught up in the Motown sound. I mean, all of us was in love with the Temptations and the Supremes and the Marvelettes and Smokey Robinson and all of that. We all loved that. They didn't necessarily voice songs that gave the movement strength, but we liked them.
We did receive a lot of criticism, say being homogenized, you know, being too white or too this or whatever. But and I remember my brother, who was in Vietnam at the time, was saying, "Mary, why don't you wear an afro?" You know, like, because that's just not our style.
Motown's style was to aim for the burgeoning teenage market, the demographic of youth, white or black. Berry Gordy had created the world's first crossover label.
Barry gets a bad rap, I think, for being too slick and having his artists too slick. But people forget the social times, that this was really a revolutionary thing to do, and this was his way of bringing the audience together and appealing to a diverse audience, which really brought blacks and whites together. If I sit down with a black woman from Detroit of my age group, we have the same musical taste. And that doesn't happen in a lot of generations.
When I was in high school, black music was sort of your national anthem. It was local music. Motown in Detroit was, the singles came out and you went downtown to the Motown Review and saw these artists. Those were our local anthems, and for us it was important in the sense that, at least for white suburban kids in this kind of pasty suburban life, this was exoticism, it was sex.
You really got a hold on me, come on!
Our music was love music. We knew that music soothed the soul. We were giving our people what they wanted from us. They stuck with us. The music has lasted, and it's part of history as being a love movement as opposed to an uprising or a protest.
Hold on, man. Oh, yes, you have. You really got a hold.
We're not politicians, and we weren't there to try and solve the world's problems with a song, you know, because at best we were trying to bring people together with our music. Motown, it was the end of race music, you know what I mean?
Hold me, please.
Well, I never thought of it in terms of black or white audiences. I felt that the emotions of people are the same all over, you know, and quality is quality, you know.
Whilst Motown was putting inner-city Detroit on the world map, a group of white, working-class suburban kids, known as the Motor City Five, were also hoping to take the world by storm.
We came out of the suburbs. We all came from families that were working-class people. Like my father started at Ford's in the 1940s. Our vision was to create a music that hadn't been done before. And Chuck Berry probably was the main influence on the MC5.
I stood up on the stand with my eyes shut tight. Didn't want to see anybody. Feeling happy, having a good time. Now, hey, do it all right, do it all right. Do it all right, do it all right.
England, of course, was the focal point. The British First Wave had revolutionized popular culture. The Americans were struggling to keep up. You know, the big American acts all of a sudden seemed hopelessly square, you know. And then New York has always had its power, and Los Angeles, of course, is the other center, the other pole of the American recording industry. But no one ever considered Detroit as part of that equation.
They were downriver boys. They were guys who lived in the disused parts of Detroit, the industrial parts. And really, when you grew up in Detroit in those areas, you had one of two ways to go. College wasn't the option. It was usually, were you going to work the line? Were you going to work in a tool and die shop? And how many fingers were you going to lose by the end of your career?
The MC5 were managed by John Sinclair, a middle-class bohemian whose artist commune was based in the heart of the inner city.
I wanted to come here to be around the jazz players and the beatniks and the dope fiends and the people who were not normal. The young white people that came here on purpose. They came here to find urban adventure, you know. The black people had not shared in the largesse of America at this time, and yet it was right there beyond their reach. They wanted that. Whereas we were the children of people who had gotten the payoff and found that, so what? You know, it wasn't what we were looking for. We weren't looking for a life of total safety and ease. We wanted some danger.
He had great weed, just fantastic, and he had a great record collection. Basically, we just wanted to hang out, you know, and be cool like him.
Sinclair was kind of like an agent provocateur. He was just a guy who knew how to grab headlines, and he was a big bearded presence, and physically he was like a guru.
Sinclair took the MC5 from the blue-collar suburbs into the heart of the city, getting them a residency at Detroit's psychedelic Grandee Ballroom.
The music scene in Detroit was born really at the Grandee Ballroom. That was like our petri dish. You know, we put the bacteria in there, we watched it multiply.
we would come to Grandy, take acid, and freak out with the MC5, you know. It was very far out. And these kids would come here from this suburban context where they had seen the Beatles on television and they thought that was great. They would come here and this would be a place that was a whole different world. Maybe they'd get laid.
Oh, you would walk in, you know, you would park, and it was a very dangerous neighborhood. So first off, if you made it through the doors intact was kind of an accomplishment. It was like an adult playground, perhaps. People would be dancing, and then at the back, there'd be a platform. They'd be doing a light show. Lots of people of all sorts, all ages, different costumes, different kinds of dress. It was freedom.
I had a tremendous amount of atmosphere. It was the perfect venue. It was not on the street level, it was upstairs. And here was this fantastic room with these archways and a promenade around, and a stage at one end, and it was kind of big and cavernous and mysterious. And it had it was just full of atmosphere. And we knew that the place had been used in previous decades as a ballroom, you know, for swing dancing and, you know, jitterbugging, and, you know, it was so it had all that kind of charisma about it. And here we were in the, you know, the mid-'60s, you know, bringing something completely new to it. It was our palace.
And I'm having the warmest memories of spectacular sex acts performed in various parts of this building. Very warm memories.
Whilst the inner city was a place of adventure for the white kids, conditions for the city's black population were becoming intolerable. Trouble was on its way.
I mean, we had a police crew called the Big Four. 4 big white guys that rode around in a big 4-door sedan. Used to jump out of the car all the time, threatening black people standing on the corner.
Firebomb busting all around me.
And they jump out and say, go home. Hell, we say, we at home, you go home.
In our mind, it was inevitable that there would be a riot by black people in Detroit because the conditions were so bad.
I could hear them people screaming.
Because when Detroit was going to blow, it was going to blow.
On the 23rd of July, 1967, Detroit erupted into riots.
I twist it around, you'll find it out.
It was the hatred of the police department that sparked that. I mean, the fact that they decided to raid an after-hour joint and arrest everybody. I mean, an after-hour joint was part of our life here in this city.
Taking my wife and my family, and those Johnny Lee's.
This is the street that the police brought their cruisers at and parked out here to arrest all those people at. And that's where the first bricks were thrown, right here, and then began to spread on down 12th Street that way, and then Linwood, Dexter, you know, involved the whole city before it was over.
Wow, the motor city's burning. Ain't a thing that I can do.
The rioting lasted 5 days, during which 43 people were killed, 33 of whom were black.
Everybody sort of thought we were going to have a riot because there had been racial issues that had mounted up, and killings and aggravations by some of the police. This place was terrorized, and there had to be a change.
And it wasn't only the city that would be changed forever. Detroit's music would be profoundly affected by the riots. Motown was dragged into this new reality when one of Martha Reeves' old hits became the unofficial anthem of the rioters.
The riots happened And Marvin Gaye, who has been known to write revolutionary songs, this is prior to what's going on, thought if he sang a song about dancing in the street, then they would stop fighting in the street. It was to quench the riots, not to incite them.
The civil rights movement had escalated, the riots had arrived. Detroit had changed. It was no longer this idyllic little city. We could no longer sing about the birds and the bees because that was not really what was on our minds. The music had to change, and it did.
And the Motown artist who would later become acclaimed for his social conscience would be Marvin Gaye, whose 1971 masterpiece, What's Going On, was a record that Berry Gordy tried to bury.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying.
After the riots, the factories closed down. They closed down work, so no one had any work. So now you have poverty. Now people are grasping for jobs, for money, for this, for that. Drugs come into the picture. So much was destroyed.
We don't need to escalate. Oh, it's not the answer, for only love can conquer.
Although the Motown sound had finally begun to diversify, the label had outgrown the crumbling city of Detroit. Berry Gordy had become interested in making films with Diana Ross, and Hollywood beckoned. In the wake of the riots, Motown would ship out west, leaving a gaping hole in the city.
Motown went to L.A. I was sad as hell because I wanted to dream of Detroit to stay around, but when they got Lady Sing the Blues, Barry's eyes were set on a bigger picture. And he didn't realize at the same time he still had all of us. We kept Motown going with the new version.
And the white music scene would also be affected by the unrest. The MC5 lived within the riot zone and were caught up in the chaos.
I was exhilarated. I wanted to overthrow the system, and I thought, man, they're taking it to the max. They're going up against them, you know. We're going up. I mean, I felt like I was part of this.
Law and order have broken down in Detroit, Michigan. Pillage, looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights.
We lived right in the middle of the ghetto. Our sympathies were with the rioters completely, against the police. We hated the police. Hated the police.
The Detroit police were becoming like the Gestapo. Seriously. They were coming looking for it.
Early one morning, the police broke the door in and arrested us all, and they found a bow and arrow in the house. And they claimed that we were snipers shooting the police with bows and arrows. So, okay, take them all in. I walk out on the street, and there's a United States Army tank on my street pointing its big gun at my door. This is on my street in my city.
In the face of relentless police oppression, the MC5 decided to form their own revolutionary group. They called themselves the White Panther Party.
The White Panther Party was just kind of a universal way of saying, you know, hey, you know, let's take this shit over.
I admired the Black Panther Party. To me, they were heroes. That these guys were from the neighborhood, and we all did. And so they had a 10-point program. So we decided we'd have a 3-point program.
Point 2 is total assault on the culture by any means necessary, including rock and roll, dope, and fucking in the streets.
Yeah, oh, come on. Rock and roll, dope, and fucking in the streets. I mean, you can't approach the White Panther Party without a sense of humor, you know? I mean, on the one hand, we were serious political revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow the government. On the other hand, we were on acid.
My take in the MC5 was that we could express this frustration with the slow pace of change, with the contradictions, with the injustices that we felt, and we could do it through our band.
Dig out the jam, motherfucker! We all got it too, no matter nothing new, got hazy now, baby. I know how you want it, Lord, with that night. The girls can't stand it when you're doing right. Let them up on the stand, and let them kick out the jam.
I mean, we wanted to rewrite society. We wanted to build it from the ground up, you know, to tear everything down and start over, you know, and do it right this time.
And motherfucker, of course, was not only a paean to the language of black Americans, in which motherfucker is a key word. Said motherfucker, it was like dropping a 20-pound bomb of shit in the middle of a church service, you know?
The MC5's Kick Out the Jams was actually a hit on local radio. And at the time, you could burn herbs ceremonially on a lone road on the highway somewhere. I remember a particular night where Kick Out the Jams came on the radio, and we beat living hell out of the dashboard. And truly, this was, you know, the id of the nation. It was the screaming, angry, libidinous howl from, it was Allen Ginsberg's howl to a beat.
I was part of an entire generation, people my age, who believed that the country was going in the wrong direction. And then to experience polarizing events, to go through the rebellion of 1967 in Detroit and hear the city of Detroit at war for a week, to deal with the contradictions in the Vietnam War. That, you know, here our government is saying we have to go over there and fight people that have nothing to do with us, that have no impact on our lives whatsoever. I guess if they're coming through the Windsor Tunnel, we're there. But they weren't coming through the Windsor Tunnel.
The anger and frustration of young white Detroit was part of a nationwide uprising, a second front fought on home soil in which American youth went up against the authorities in cities across the land.
The police were just the front lines, but I mean the school principals, the congressmen, the city council, all authorities. The last thing they wanted was turned on youth. They wanted youth who would turn off and go along with the program.
We were under constant pressure from the Detroit Police Department and later the state police. And then, you know, federal government got involved, the FBI. We entered into their sphere.
The Detroit authorities decided it was time to take action, and take out the man they regarded as the Pied Piper of the city's youth.
Goodbye.
I believe they used the marijuana lost to silence him. But if you give 2 joints to this little hippie chick who turned out to be an undercover agent, that gets you 22 life. That's what he was facing.
Sinclair was sentenced to 10 years jail.
It was for 2 joints of marijuana. Hardly a crime. Certainly not something that you need to keep someone segregated from the public.
They took John away in handcuffs, and we were like lost sheep. We didn't ever expect that to happen. We thought, God, he'd get sentenced and get appeal bond, and we'd get him out. That didn't happen. They were so dead set in locking him up that all of a sudden we lost our leader.
Obviously, he couldn't continue managing the band, and it was right at the time, right at the point when the MC5 needed to make the step from being a local band to being, you know, on a major label and, you know, be on tour and, you know, make calculated, smart decisions. And there wasn't anybody there to make the decisions.
Whilst their leader languished in jail, the MC5's progression was put on hold. But the influence of their revolutionary, acid-drenched rock had already reached some unlikely places in Detroit.
They used to call themselves the white niggers. You know, so, I mean, they were really gone. Kick out the jams, motherfucker. They were like the ones we all got branded by, you know, because they were really the bad boys.
George Clinton had originally come to Detroit with the Parliaments to audition for Motown.
Our notion of black music until George Clinton was Motown. Motown was our local music until one of our school dances, this guy showed up with his band and they came to lip sync I Want to Testify in the upper gym of our high school. And we looked at him cross-eyed like this was the world's first black hippie as far as we knew.
Down, so doggone low, had to look up at my feet.
George is a genius guy. He takes from everything. And they were just part of this wildness. You know, I mean, they were not your run-of-the-mill Negroes. You know, they had another destination. And then I saw the MC5, and then I think they started taking acid.
Joe, been delicious to me.
Berry Gordy had turned the Parliaments down, so Clinton opted for a radical change of direction.
Yeah, Temptations on acid. By the time Testify came out, Beatles and the Rolling Stones, the English invasion had started. So we realized, wow, we're a little bit late for Motown itself. And so we said, well, it's time for us to change.
Combining rock and soul to create groundbreaking funk, Parliament Funkadelic occupied a strange middle ground in Detroit's racial mix.
George Clinton is like the other side in some ways of the MC5 coin, in that he took Detroit and spun it. The Funkadelic wouldn't have been that without the flamboyance of white rock.
We were too black for white folks and too white for black folks. But the audience that we did have stuck with us, period. And every year there would be more and more with the colleges. It always got new set of kids every year.
You know, those were the people he mowed over, were stoned white kids. Black kids were probably listening to something else as the mothership took off around the country.
What black musicians were doing was just incredibly important to my group, the Stooges.
It was the only music around that sounded better than the damn English music, which was so very good. But black still sounded better. It's still, they trumped it.
George Clinton wasn't the only act in Detroit to benefit from the MC5. The Five had a little brother band, another bunch of white kids from Detroit's metropolitan fringes.
As London has Oxford, Detroit has Ann Arbor. The area functioned economically as an educational center which fed the transport and war industries that were centered in Detroit.
No fun, my babe, no fun.
Hell of an easy place to get a band going. There was loose money floating around the university. There were church groups that were only too eager to get the sinful activities under their roof where they could watch, you know. And the Stooges played a lot of our early gigs at a Unitarian church.
For another day.
The Stooges opened for the MC5 at the Grandie Ballroom, but instead of revolutionary rock and roll, they were an avant-garde outfit with a wild stage act.
We loved the MC5, but there was no way we could be like the MC5. We had to do something original, something our own. That was a big part of Iggy's job, and he did a really good job at it. We were as high energy, dedicated and driving and tough, but different.
Some people really liked it and some people really didn't. And then some people began to approach the stage, wanting to be our fans, wanting to get near us, and some other people wanted to stand up and say, "Fuck you, this is wrong, you know, you can't do," you know, it was really like, you're ruining everything, you know. We're on the verge of a new age here, we're taking over, we don't need you.
It's 1969, okay. Walk across the USA. It's another year for me and you. Another year with nothing to do. It's another year for me and you. Another year with nothing to do.
It was just mayhem. It was pretty much just having one riff and just going off on it and letting it go wherever it goes.
Now, last year I was 21. I didn't have a lot of fun.
If there was a large crowd of people in the room and they weren't sure how to let things happen to them, then I had to give them a little help. Or we would have had a non-event, which would have led to a non-career. Yeah.
The Stooges would develop a totally new, primitive sound inspired by Detroit.
When I was in elementary school, we had a field trip to the Rouge Industrial Complex. There was a machine that would just drop a piece of sheet metal. Wow! I wanted to make music. I thought it should sound like that. And I loved it. It was so impressive. It was power.
So messed up, I want you here.
That one piano note driving and driving, and the sleigh bells putting those dins, putting that, you know, big din of sound over simple music. It did sort of have kind of an assembly line robotic kind of feel to it.
And I'll lay right down in my favorite place.
Detroit people are good people, they're smart people, but they're tough people. And the music they wanted was tough and hard and driving.
Be your dog, and now I wanna be your dog.
It was an answer to all the florid excesses of pop and back to this elemental, almost primitive feeling. I want to be your dog. To speak of Detroit, Motown was the apotheosis of the extended chord. But Detroit rock and roll came along and said, to hell with all this finery. let's go back to the basics. And I think Iggy was as raw as it ever got.
The Stooges' primitivism harked back to Detroit godfather John Lee Hooker, but instead of inner city blues, their music oozed adolescent suburban boredom.
Out of my mind now, Saturday night, 1979, going inside, radio burning, up above, beautiful baby, be my love all night, till the blow, our wife.
Yeah, Iggy was right. When you look at what the concerns of youth are, you have something that that's really incredibly perceptive. It's almost like poetry, you know, these little phrases that capture the state of youth, the somewhat monotony, the sense of closed doors, the sense of rootlessness and boredom.
There was no way it would fit into FM radio. Anything was playing then. It was a different definition of what music is and of what rock and roll is. The Stooges were that, as the Ramones were that 5 or 6 years later.
The Stooges are totally the starting point for what would become punk.
That's peanut butter.
Ahead of their time, the Stooges would not find due recognition until much later. Instead, it would take an outsider to export the Detroit sound worldwide.
Consistently, for 50 years, there's been a phenomenon in which, in the recording industry, there is a hot town. And when one good thing happens that lights up a town, then whoosh, they will swoop in from the coasts. In the 60s, Detroit had its moment. All sorts of people, you know, were going to get signed. And in fact, I think that's why Alice Cooper moved there and became a Detroit band.
Having been on the fringes of LA's rock scene in the late 60s, Alice Cooper had met with little success before moving back to Michigan.
I'll be back home again.
In Los Angeles and in New York, if you're going to go to a Ramones concert, if you're going to go to a Alice concert, if you're going to go to a Kiss concert, back then, you'd come home from your job, go home, put on your black torn-up Levi's, put on your leather jacket, mess up your hair, kind of smear some makeup on and go to the show. In Detroit, they would just come from work, because that's what they wore.
They did a gig with the Stooges, and 3 months later they were neighbors, you know, and all of a sudden it was Under My Wheels and 18, and you know, and they killed us.
He would like smear peanut butter all over himself and jump in the audience, and he was a show unto himself. Musically, they weren't very theatrical. The band just kind of stood there and played, but Iggy did all the work. Whereas Alice Cooper, every single song was a theatrical bit.
They took our themes, articulated them well enough, threw all the crazy shit out, did very, very good songcraft, and good vocals. Good, strong, nasty rock vocals. And they did the units.
Alice Cooper took the Detroit sound and turned it into a lucrative pantomime, leaving the uncompromising Stooges and MC5 in limbo.
I think everyone went home to their respective mothers. basically. That's what I did first. We were all broke. I was strung out. I decamped home until I was stabilized enough to go out and seek further employment.
And what happens is it's a crushing defeat. You know, it's a blow to your ego. That one day you were the golden child and you're not anymore, and it's painful. And what I did was found the pain-killing properties of Jack Daniels and heroin.
It's a sad tale that all the Detroit bands kind of ended badly, but then, yeah, it's not surprising in terms of Detroit. There is a sense that Detroit will get you.
But there would be a happy ending for one person from Detroit's rock scene. John Sinclair was 2 years into his sentence when fellow revolutionaries John and Yoko Lennon got wind of his plight and came to Michigan.
This song I wrote for John Sinclair. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
On the following Monday, John was freed.
Who was that person in the corrections department of Michigan who made that decision to let John out 3 days after John Lennon came? I mean, that coincidence, I would kiss that person. It was just amazing.
I've been out of trouble for 35 years since I got out of prison because I don't do that anymore. I don't give a fuck what they do. I'm going to sit there and have my joint, and I don't care what they think, or I'm just going to stay out of their way.
As the new decade arrived, Detroit started to resemble a ghost town. Motown finally completed its move to LA in '72, where a few of its more visionary artists pioneered a tougher, new funk sound with a real grip on what the black inner city was becoming.
A boy's born in hot time, Mississippi, surrounded by 4 walls that ain't so pretty. His parents give him love and affection to keep him strong, moving in the right direction, living just enough for the city. His father works some days for 14 hours, and you can bet he barely makes $1. His mother goes to scrub the floors for many, and you best believe she hardly gets a penny, living just enough for the city.
What you had in Detroit, which was happening already before the riots, you had a city that was going black at its core, and white people that didn't like that and were moving out to surround the city.
Detroit continued to decline through the first Arab oil embargo, and that's when Chrysler, GM, and Ford got caught, you know, producing cars that get 9 miles to the gallon, and the Japanese said, oh, well, we can make a car that gets 40 miles to the gallon. And so that was the beginning of the end in Detroit.
Life both rose and fell with the fortunes of the American auto companies. And at that time, they left Detroit like an empty peanut shell. They drained the lifeblood out of it, and the money disappeared and the manufactories disappeared to where the taxes were more favorable.
But whilst the city's industry has been decimated, its music has survived. Today, even some of those who may have overindulged in the 60s are still going strong.
The Stooges are playing now. They're more vital and more fabulous than ever. Their audiences are bigger than ever. People who weren't born then love them more than ever. It's gotten through. And if we look around now, the Beatles are not the major influence. It's more likely that the Stooges and the Ramones are.
I mean, as simple as the Stooges music is, in a sense, probably now it's far more popular than it was in 1969 and 70. You know, even today, with the kind of nouveau garagic sounds that come out of there, the Demolition Doll Rods, the White Stripes. These are bands that really bring it down to an elemental level. You've got a good riff, you've got a phrase to stick over it, you whack the snare, and there you are.
And along with the White Stripes, Eminem resides at the top of Detroit's musical pile. The world's biggest hip-hop star, Slim Shady, is another suburban white kid upholding Detroit's musical tradition for blending black and white. His songs bring to life the social problems of modern Detroit, a city where within its 8-mile road boundary, the population has now halved to under 1 million, over 80% of whom are black and a third of whom live below the breadline. This world is mine for the taking. Make me king as we move toward a new world order. A normal life is boring, but superstardom's close to postmortem. It only grows harder.
If you think of Detroit in the modern period as a huge, vast African-American ghetto, it's like New Orleans after the flood. Detroit has been through all this, and they didn't even have a natural disaster. It just got washed over by America, you know.
We stand here today. Me and Chuck was just talking earlier. Chrysler just signed a new contract 2 weeks ago, and today on the news, they announced they're laying off 12,000 people permanently. Half of those 12,000 people are directly here in the city of Detroit, which is going to make things that much more devastating than it is now. Everything has just been dismantled. Or you ride down the streets here, it look like Lebanon or something. No more games, I'ma change what you call rage. Tear this roof off like 2 dogs' cage. I was playing in the beginning, the mood all changed.
Visit bbc.co.uk/Detroit to watch extended interviews from Motor City's burning and to find out more about the music of Detroit. Next tonight, John Lee Hooker and Friends.
And I can't provide the right type of life for my